My name is John Dodson. I'm an urban farmer in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm for the soil because without healthy soil, there's no healthy food. With no healthy food, there's no healthy life.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 23-5 of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii. I know many of you could care less what episode number this is, but it's the 5th episode of 2023, and that's what it is. It is what it is. We're going to get to our special guest in just a few moments. She is a fascinating young lady that is really renowned at a young age. Becky Szarzynski, she has a lot of knowledge about Virginia forages, grazing management, and soil health, and she's going to be talking with Mary and Eric and I in just a few moments about her role in soil health and how she manages her family's farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Becky Szarzynski will be our special guest in this episode, and also wanted to tease a future episode. Some of you have asked to learn a little bit more about the backgrounds of your host, Mary Sketch Bryant, and also Eric Benfelt, as well as myself. And we thought we would do that and have no guests, but just talk about, where we all came from and what how she got involved in the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. And there's a lot of things about Eric Benfelt you might not know. He's a very interesting man. And also we'll have on that podcast Sarah Koth. Sarah is our blog writer, a very active participant in the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. You see a lot of her articles at our website, forthesoil.org, and then just click on the blog. Sarah Koth will also join us for that conversation as we kind of share a little bit more about our own backgrounds and how we got involved with encouraging soil health. That's coming up on a future podcast. But now let's get to episode 23-5. Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining us today, we have Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Community Viability, and also Mary Sketch Bryant with Virginia Soil Health Coalition. And guys, we have a really special guest today. She is widely known in the Virginia agricultural community as a forage and pasture specialist, and also a passion for soil health. Mary, would you do the honors of the introduction?
Thanks, Jeff. So honored to have Becky Szarzynski with us today. Becky is the co-owner and operator with her father of Mountain Glen Farm, and she also is the mentor coordinator with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, as well as very involved in the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council on their board, and engaged in education and outreach across the state. So a great source of inspiration, education, and knowledge around soil health, particularly in the livestock realm. So thanks for being with us, Becky.
Oh, thanks everyone for having me today. I'm really excited to have our little conversation.
Well, Becky, tell us about the farm itself, where you live.
Yeah, so my father, Glen, and I co-own and operate together Mountain Glen Farm here in the Fairfield, Virginia region. So just kind of between Stanton and Lexington in the beautiful southern part of the Shenandoah Valley. We've been farming here for the last about 35 years now. And we started out at 120 open acres. And then when I was about 19, I told Dad and Mom that I wanted to expand the operation. And so we're up to almost 400 open acres now. We graze South Pole cattle. So we focus on forage-based genetics here on our farming operation, implement rotational grazing practices, are really focused on ecological and economic practices that are beneficial for our farm, but also for our local communities around us as well. Just recently started getting into grazing pigs also. So we're kind of, we're just kind of getting all over the place. We used to do sheep a little bit, and it's been a great learning curve and experience the last 15 years for sure, that I've really delve deeper into our farming businesses. And along the way, I've met so many great people, especially when it comes to the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council, so many farmers out there that are sharing their knowledge. And so it's been great.
And Becky, you mentioned about raising cattle and then delving into raising pigs and hogs. And with soil health, we talk about energizing with diversity. How have you seen that as helpful on your operation and in your work?
Yeah, diversity is key. It really is. And I do some videos on my YouTube channel, and I've talked about it before when I was taking a pasture walk. So I was collecting pasture bouquets was what the video was about. And just essentially I was going around collecting all the different plant types that I had found in my pasture at that time of year. And plant diversity is key. I think also having different type of animal impact is really helpful. Like I mentioned before, we used to run sheep with our cattle. And the way those two grazed together was just really, really beneficial for not only each other in terms of like the parasite load that we've all kind of heard about, but also in the grazing management aspect. The sheep would kind of eat something different than the cows, and the cows would eat something different than the sheep. And it worked really well together. Also getting into grazing pigs, which I know people don't think about grazing when they think about pigs. But these guys are really miraculous. It's a newer breed. And one thing that I've noticed with them is that they will just graze everything that we consider a weed out there. And so having these different types of animals on our landscape will achieve different types of plant communities. And again, diversity is key, and kind of bringing back not having monocultures out there, because monocultures are not resilient for our landscape. And so we want diversity so the animals can pick out what nutritional needs they need, but also just to be more resilient in times of drought. Certain plants thrive, or in drier conditions and wetter conditions, other plants thrive. So we don't want monocultures. We want diversity, so that creates resiliency in our plants, but also in our soils. You know, we know that plants exudate sugars into the soil, and each plant has a different type of chemical exudate that it goes into the soil and helps with feeding those microbes. And so if you have different types of plants, you got different types of microbes, and the more diversity we can have, the more resilient we're going to be on our farm.
And Becky, you mentioned that you and your father have been farming for about 35 years. You've owned the farm, and I think you returned about 15 years ago. And now you are very deep in engaging in soil health systems and practices. Has that always been the case? I'd be interested in what sparked that focus.
So I grew up on the farm. So my dad always farmed his entire life, and he was actually made a career as a forester in the U.S. Forest Service. So he was always a manager of natural resources in a way, so trees versus grass. But he's always been involved with farming as well. So I grew up on a small farm. It was like 120 acres. So I always had that background, always loved it. When I went away to college, decided I hated college, I was going to come back to the farm. And that's about 15 years ago now. And I didn't know exactly how to make a living with farming. I knew I wanted to farm, but I didn't know what that meant. At that point in time, sustainability was really the buzzword that was coming around. And I felt kind of like that was more or less what I wanted to try to achieve with our farming operation. So I really started diving into classes and workshops. A lot of them that were put on by the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council have been instrumental in my learning over the last 15 years. And I just wanted to kind of take it down that route that kind of jived with me a little more than maybe what we were doing at that time. We were doing very, very slow 1 to 3-4 week rotations on the farm. We were using a lot of inputs on the farm as well. And I knew to make a living farming, I needed to cut those input costs. And a lot of the soil health practices fit perfectly with that. It's again, working with nature and not necessarily against her. Not saying that sometimes you do work against her to try to make a certain impact, but in general, you can be, in my experience, if you want to be an efficient farmer, you got to utilize the genetics in your livestock or in your plants to the best of their ability. And usually that's working with nature and not trying to make it into something different.
We're talking today with Becky Szarzynski of Fairfield, Virginia. And Becky, I believe that's in Rockbridge County. Am I correct?
It is, yes.
In the southern Shenandoah Valley. And Becky, it was really interesting that you mentioned working with nature. And I'd like to kind of pick your brain a little bit about, you mentioned that you raise South Pole cattle. Very specifically, you just didn't say commercial cattle or Angus or Hereford or what, very specific South Pole. And it's interesting when you said that, a memory came back to me when I was at the Virginia Beef Expo several years ago, and I was standing next to the sale ring there, and there was a conversation going on next to me about South Pole cattle. And I looked over, and I'm going to be accused of name dropping here, but it's honest to God, it's the truth. It was Teddy Gentry, the bass player for the group Alabama. And he has a cattle operation in Fort Payne, Alabama. And he was talking all about this breed of South Pole. He described it as the pasture breed. Can you tell me a little bit about that selection process and how that ties into working with nature?
Yeah. So yeah, Teddy Gentry for the band Alabama essentially developed and created this breed called South Pole, P-O-L.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
He did. And it's been, I think he started about 30 years ago, and he's done some amazing work. I got into this breed about 15 years ago when I first heard about it, because it is a pasture-based breed. It's forage-only breed. And it does really well in our hot, humid climates here in Virginia. And it's just a really efficient animal that's perfect for the type of grazing management that I do in my farming operation. It's a great fit. And so again, kind of going back to that idea of matching the genetics that fit your environment. And I think for farmers, they can be way more economical if you can find what those genetics are, no matter if it's in beef or sheep or hogs or whatnot. Find the genetics that work for you and your environment that can handle your climate, your forages, and you're going to actually, I think, be a little more successful in the financial department. But this breed has been great. We have been slowly transitioning to South Pole from Black Angus. And it's a red colored breed. It's a little smaller frame size, so they're about 1,000-pound animals. But we find that the smaller frame size is actually a bit more efficient on forage only on the pasture lands, and a little lighter on the ground as well. And they still raise one heck of a calf every year. You know, we sell calves, stockers, and breeding stock. And I'm thrilled to bits with it. And Teddy did a great job with this breed.
And Becky, you've mentioned about your grazing management system. If you could talk a little bit more about that, because I know even for myself, you hear continuous grazing, rotational grazing, management intensive grazing, or mob grazing. What do you do on your farm particularly to promote soil health through grazing?
Yeah, there's a lot of titles and descriptions out there on different types of grazing practices, and to each their own. Whatever you find works for you on your farming operation with your livestock and your environment, then that's the one that you should go with. But also staying adaptable and not getting in the rut of doing the same thing time and time again. I think that's a little bit of how we've gotten into the situation we are today with some of agriculture. We want to follow a formula and a recipe, and sometimes we just need to look out on the landscape and see what's going on and make a move depending on that. So I just call it intensive rotational grazing, just to be general about it. We move our cattle herd usually once a day during the growing season. But again, it depends. If I'm trying to accomplish something else, try to impact one pasture harder than the other, because maybe there's a weedy species in there that I want to try to hit a little bit, then I'll change it up. So it's always depending on what time of year, what livestock class I have. I can kind of hammer a pasture harder with dry cows than I can maybe with yearlings. They're gonna be able to utilize forages that are a little more mature, and yearlings might not be able to do that and might not want to do that. So but yeah, we try to move them at least once a day, twice a day. During the wintertime, we utilize stockpiled forage. So I'll move them right now this time of year every few days. I'll supplement them with some hay, and kind of just keep rotating over the farm, utilizing my stockpile and supplementing with hay. And to be honest, we actually kind of do something different every year. I'm always trying different type of grazing practices to see if something works better or worse. And I've experienced both of those, better and worse in some aspects. So it's a learning process, and we never stop learning. It keeps you humble, and it keeps you on your toes for sure.
Becky, to switch gears a little bit, you're a young farmer yourself, and I know that you're passionate about encouraging the next generation to farm, whether it's stay in farming, to be a new beginning farmer, in the role that could have in really building innovation in farming systems. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing there, and what the challenges and opportunities are.
There's a lot there, Mary. I think from what I'm seeing, I'm a millennial, just to give you guys a little age range there. I'm seeing a lot more millennials and the next generation down wanting to come back to the farm, wanting to come back to the land, which is really, really encouraging, because as we all know, a lot of farmers, the median age is, I think, near 60. There's going to be a large, probably farm and land transition happening in the next, I've heard, 10 years. And so it's really exciting to see a lot of younger folks wanting to come back to the land. And I am also seeing that younger folks are wanting to do things a little differently on the land. They don't want to do more of the conventional or traditional farming. They really are. And for me too, personally, I farm because of the way that I feel about farming and the land and my connection with soil, plants, animals. And it's really exciting to see what beneficial impacts we can have trying these different practices on the land. So it's going to be, I think, the next decade or two, farming is going to look different in the next couple of decades as we make that transition. And just to make another plug for the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council, they've got an amazing farmer to farmer mentor program that is helping new beginning grazers get into this realm of farming, because it is hard. As we know, land prices, especially this past year, have continued to increase, and it's really hard to make a living on farming with the land prices that they are. And that is definitely a challenge that we're all facing. I know as a young farmer wanting to expand, it makes it very, very difficult. And so we have to go about it in different ways, whether that's leasing or helping other farmers that already have land base established. But I think in the next couple of generations and decades, farming is going to look different. And that's exciting to me, because we're essentially taking the science of soil health and biology and finding all these new exciting things, which is why I love soil health. It's always something new coming out in studies, and it keeps you really intrigued. We're starting to find the science, and we're pairing it up with what's working and as explaining why. So it's an exciting time to be in agriculture, I think.
We're talking with Becky Szarzynski of Fairfield, Virginia. Becky, just about a minute remaining in this segment, but you mentioned you have a YouTube channel. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Mountain Glen Farm. I'm also on Facebook, Mountain Glen Farm, and you can email me at mountainglenfarm@gmail.com. So it makes it pretty easy there.
What are some of the recent topics you covered on the YouTube channel?
I think I've made some recent ones on my pigs. Since that's the up and coming thing. I've had some piglets the last couple of months here farrowing. And I'm always kind of focused on just little things that I'm doing on the farm, whether it's like my pasture bouquets or bale grazing, different practices and principles that I'm using and trying to then come back to see what the results are later on.
So the name of the channel is Mountain Glen Farm?
Correct.
Okay, both on Facebook, social media, YouTube. Mountain Glen Farm. Very good. Very good. Our time is up in this segment. Thank you so much for having a conversation with us about what you're doing on your farm concerning soil health. We want to thank you for your time. Mary and Eric, real pleasure having both of you. And Becky, we'll be back again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Becky.
Thanks, Jeff.
For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.